I would say for me, it started off in my childhood. I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, around a bunch of violence, around a bunch of just kind of nonsense. It was a kind of tough growing up. And I kind of developed depression, anxiety early on. These things kind of plagued my life. Growing up, I kind of turned to like basketball, women, really doing whatever I wanted to do to fill those voids of darkness inside of me. And essentially kept going on into my high school years to where I kind of just felt so depressed, and I couldn't really run from the pain anymore. Like I tried to use anything to really fill those voids in my heart that only God could fill. And so eventually, one day, when I was a senior in high school, I had a close friend of mine. She basically convicted me. She called me out on how I was living. So at this time, I'm a senior in high school. I'm about 17 years old. I have a girlfriend who all we do is basically have sex. Really, at this point, I don't even know it, but I'm addicted to sex. I'm addicted to porn, masturbation, all these things to kind of make me feel cool on the outside. And she kind of calls me out on it. She says, Josh, like, like, Jesus did not call you to live this way. You can't keep doing X, Y, and Z and still proclaim to love Him and to know Him, etc., etc. And so this caused me to really self-reflect. And I know as humans, it's hard for us to really um, look within our hearts and kind of be truthful with ourselves. And so at this time, I decided to, say like, man, like, is she right? Like, what does the Bible say about this? Who does God say I am? So first thing I did was ask my parents. I said, Mom, Dad, what do I do? Is this true? Is this how we're supposed to live, etc., etc.? And so my parents, they're believers, right? But they are kind of old school. So their perception of Scripture and what Jesus says and who He was is a little bit different. So really, I had to go and look at the Bible for myself. And when I look at the Bible, I saw a God who I never thought of before. I really saw somebody who was loving, who was caring, who was compassionate, and who most of all was protective. And I realized that as a human being created in His image, that the way I was living, who I was, wasn't really who He created me to be. So shortly after my friend confronted me, I decided to go to my local church and give my life to Christ. And when I did this, I understood the gospel of Jesus, but I didn't understand the magnitude of what it meant and the weight and freedom that it really carried. So essentially, after this, a few months later, I went to college, and I realized that my life had to really change because I wasn't going to be living the same life that I was used to living. I was going to be walking my new freedom as a Christian. And so essentially, I went to college, and I tried to stay away from all the old things that were tearing me down the wrong path. I tried to give away porn, sex, just all these different things that I would fill my mind with to kind of make me feel whole or cool on the outside. And so essentially, I went through my freshman year. I kind of would feel in it, feel out of it. I kind of would relapse a little bit. And then my sophomore year, I actually joined the local church. And this is where I met a group of guys who were able to kind of take me under their wing and kind of show me what it means, to really be a man of God. That was actually the first time anybody ever called me a man of God. The pastor looked me in my eye and he says, "Hey, man of God, how you doing?" And when I saw how these men were living, how they were so compassionate, how they were so loving, just like Jesus was in the Bible, it really kind of turned my heart around and it really showed me who God really created me to be. And so from this point, I really started to read the Word and I really started to pray and ask God to reveal Himself to me. I really started to understand Scripture better. I started to understand who Jesus was and what He was teaching. And the biggest thing for me was that I think all humans really struggle with is the concept of self-righteousness. So essentially in Matthew, Jesus preached about to the Pharisees that they were so self-righteous under the law that they were hiding their sinfulness in their hearts. But He was saying to them that God judges, their hearts. He doesn't just judge what we do on the outside. He sees what's in our hearts. And so essentially, I think a thing that plagues all human beings is on the outside, you want to look like a good person. You want to have this certain image to uphold and say like, oh, I'm a good person, I'm a nice person, etc. But the thing with that is everybody is in their own mind a good person. There's no objectiveness to that. And so what I saw with Jesus was He preached objectiveness. He preached that there are things in this world that plague our hearts and that really affect us more than we can see. And so for me, that really caused like, man, like I really have to deal with these things. I can't, just hide them. I can't keep running from them.